Okay, then we will start. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, Abhijeet. Welcome to yet another HBCSE seminar. Today we have Dr. Abhijeet Bardapurkar with us, talking to us on a very interesting topic, valuing science, scientific timber and its critiques. The talk will center on a very basic question: why value science? To answer this question, Abhijeet maintains that we have to study the values that science should stand for. Indeed, the values that make science possible. In India, the relationship between science and values is shaped by the quasi-academic discussions on scientific temper. Personally, I feel most of these popular discussions have an evangelistic tone to it and fails to provide a nuanced account, a deeper perspective on science and the process of knowledge construction involved in it. And part of the reason for this may be strategic, as well as one of the key goals of this narrative is to fight against superstitions. And there is a need to be loud and clear rather than philosophical. So Abhijeet will, in the talk, do a broad brush review of this discussions debate to learn what is at stake when we talk about scientific timber. About the speaker, to many of us here, Abhijeet needs no introduction. He is an alumni of HBCSE. If I'm not wrong, the first batch after a formal graduate school was established. And I would say, like, aptly the philosopher among all, among the cohort. So after his PhD, he was in Mysore, Bhubaneswar before joining the faculty at Ambedkar University, Delhi. Then he moved to join Azim Premji University, Bengaluru, where he is currently an assistant professor. Abhijeet is primarily interested in the development of scientific explanations and science learning. His research and teaching interests have now grown towards the philosophy of education, particularly in the areas of ethics and education. Over to you, Abhijeet.
Okay, thank you, Mashood. Am I audible?
Yeah. Yes, yes.
Yeah. Okay. So thank you. I mean, I was happy when Mashood wrote to me saying that you are invited for a talk at HBCSE. Of course, he was quick to add that this is a virtual talk. So he turned my happiness into a virtual happiness rather than the actual happiness. Anyways, so I am not really very comfortable in giving such talks on this virtual platform. So therefore, I qualified my talk with a broad brush thing, because I think that the brush cannot be very fine when we are connected to each other virtually rather than in person. So anyway, let me begin this talk now. Let me share the screen. Thank you, Mashood, for this opportunity, and I hope you will find this worth your time. Let me okay, can you see this?
Yes, yes.
Okay. But okay, fine. So actually, my interest in scientific temper developed because of my interest in ethics and the relationship of ethics and science. And when I read Stephen Shapin, I realized that actually, when we think of science and development of science, the way scientific method was developed during scientific revolution, so that development cannot be understood unless we think about the not just epistemic but also ethical commitments of those scientists which were at that time called natural philosophers. We can't understand really, we can't grasp the purpose of scientific method. So anyway, so that's how I got interested in this um, debate around scientific temper. And I'll give you some background of this debate. So actually, okay, so there was a symposium held in Hyderabad in January 23, 1964. And this was a symposium on the scientific attitude, which was titled as a symposium of irrational belief of our people and how to change them. So actually, this symposium was later published in a magazine called Seminar in March 1964, and I am really grateful to Professor Roddam Narasimha, who is unfortunately not here amongst us now, for sending me this issue of Seminar magazine, which he had with him. So this symposium was convened by Satish Dhawan, A. Rahman, P.M. Bhargava, and there were many participants, many names including D.D. Kosambi and Obaid Siddiqui, and Francis Crick, etc., etc. So now after this symposium, I mean, the scientists who were part of the symposium were really troubled by the superstition and irrationality that they found to be rampant among Indians, and they were worried about that, and they wanted to do something about it, and they were thinking about how to cultivate the scientific attitude. Now, of course, after that, a statement on scientific temper was published by Nehru Center in 1981 by a group chaired by P.N. Huxer and conveyed by Bakul Patel, again P.M. Bhargava, and B.V. Subbarayappa. Okay, and this statement on scientific temper was signed by, of course, in their personal capacity. It is written there that they are signing it in their personal capacity. Signed by, among others, Vijay Kulkarni, B.M. Udgaonkar. The signatories included persons from all walks of life. There were many scientists also. I have not put their names here, but there were also persons from other walks of life, like Tara Ali Beg, Sham Benegal, K.N. Raj, Mohit Sen, Bipin Chandra. Now, when this statement was published, of course, the statement on scientific temper was republished in a magazine, Mainstream, to which Ashish Nandi responded with a counter statement on humanistic temper. Okay. Now, this counter statement was a rather ruthless critique of the statement, and this critique of the statement itself, and in general, the critique of those who advocated the cultivation of scientific temper continued in more or less the same form in the writings of Shiva Vishwanathan, Claude Alvarez, Vandana Shiva, Geeta Chadha, Sundar Sarukai, and among other people. I have put some names here. So in this talk, I will refer to this body of work, which was probably initiated by Ashish Nandi, or anyway precipitated by the writing of Ashish Nandi, and of course it was supported or even enriched or furthered by Shiva Vishwanathan, Alvarez, Shiva, and Sundar Sarukai more recently. So so this I will refer as this body of work I will refer as a critique of science in general, and this body of work is a critique of science in general and scientific temper in particular. Now, of course, why are we interested in this? We are interested in this because we are interested in science education, and of course, science education cannot be conceptualized apart from education. So demands of education are also demands of science education to some extent, because the purpose or aims of science education are expected to contribute to the aims of education in general. And they, in any case, they cannot be conceptualized apart from aims of science education, cannot be or should not be conceptualized apart from the aims of education. Now, of course, one of the aim of education is development of a person in a desirable direction, and we do hope that learning science contributes to this development of a person in a desirable direction, and that's why we teach science. Of course, when we think of this, so I'm not sure if you are not following something, or if you are if you think that this is too unfamiliar and needs certain clarifications, you may stop me and ask. Of course, I can't see any of you, so you may have to kind of unmute yourself, or whatever way Mashood decides. So hello, am I audible clearly? Hello.
Yeah. You're audible. Please raise your hands or type in the chat box. But if it is not a quick clarificatory thing, Abhijeet would prefer it to be taken at the end.
Right.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
So when we think of aim of education, we think of two things: knowledge and action. And of course, when we think of knowledge and action, we think of theory and practice, right? So now the point is that action or practice in education, okay, I don't know about electoral politics, but in education, it cannot be conceptualized. Action cannot be conceptualized apart from knowledge, and practice cannot be conceptualized apart from theory. Okay, and this was brought out beautifully by John Dewey in his book called Quest for Certainty. So he says that quest for certainty divided knowledge and action. Well, knowledge, of course, we expect that it is rational. It captures the necessities. I mean, if it is scientific knowledge, it captures the natural necessities, and it is unchanging and hence certain. Whereas action is empirical, particular. When an action is taking place, there is a particular person who is acting at a particular time in a particular space, And of course, it is contingent on so many things, right? So I'm talking to you, but I can't be with you, and because it is contingent on the way we are interacting with each other, and therefore action is probable, right? So on one hand, we hope that knowledge is certain. On the other hand, we know that the action is particular and contingent, right? So perfect certainty, DV says, is what man wants, substituting search for security by practical means for quest for absolute certainty by cognitive means, right? Now this certainty that we hope can only be secured by cognitive means, right? So on one hand, we want, when we are acting, we look for certain security, right? And on the other hand, but we know that this security of action can only be very limited, right? And therefore, we also have this quest for absolute certainty, which can only be achieved by cognitive means. Anyway, so the point is that this tension between knowledge and action and theory and practice is a very well acknowledged tension, and it becomes more acute when we think of education, or when we think of aims of education, right? So so DV thought that DV thought this as a fundamental problem, because man has two modes, two dimensions of belief, cannot be doubted. He has beliefs about actual existences and the course of events, and he has beliefs about ends to be striven for. What do we want to achieve? Policies to be adopted, goods to be attained, and evils to be averted, right? So the most urgent of all practical problems concerns the connection of the subject matter of these two kinds of beliefs. Okay, so what is this connection? So anyway, what is the connection between knowledge and action, or theory and practice? So this is a very old problem indeed. So now, given this foreground and background, let me turn to scientific temper and its critiques. Okay. Now, this is the critique. Okay. This is written by Nandi in 1988, and this is taken from his piece, 1988 piece, right? So he says that science is quintessentially reductionist and thus necessarily violent. The regime of a violent reductionist science typifies a compact between modern capitalism, represented by the multinational corporations, and the third word, elites, won over through a share of the profits from such science and through slogans about progress, development, and the scientific temper. Now, there are, of course, first of all, probably he thinks that the scientists call for cultivation of scientific temper, or their claim that science is necessary for progress and development. This is all slogan. I mean, he says that he thinks that this is all just sloganeering, right? These are all just slogans. And actually, science is reductionist in its attitude, and necessarily violent, right? And it is successful because it is supported by modern capitalism. So it derives its power from the support it gains from multinational corporations, etc., etc. Right now, actually, when I read this, I remembered, since I'm talking at HBCSE now, that as a graduate student, we attended a talk by Paul Nurse, who was a who is a Nobel laureate in biology. And after the talk, I asked him, what do you think when people say that biology, and particularly biology you do, is reductionist? And his answer remained with me. He said that, look, this reductionism is a very dirty word, and we should talk in some other terms about this issue. Anyways, so this is the critique, right? Now, what is the question? The question, we probably we won't be able to grasp this critique unless we ask this question: what is science, right? And on one hand, these critiques of scientific temper are very allergic to reductionism. But on the other hand, if you read them carefully, they end up reducing science to scientific method on one hand, and to technology on the other hand. So first of all, it is unclear that when they talk about science, what is it that they're talking about? I mean, it's unclear to their writings, okay? It's opaque. And the second point is that they seem to reduce whatever they are critiquing, I mean, which goes by the name of science in their writing, to scientific method and technology based on science. Okay, so the question that comes is, what is science? Fine. So this I already talked about. So what is science? Okay. Now, what is science? I mean,
I just have a clarificatory question. In the last slide, could you just, sorry, yeah, I'm a first year student here. My name is Bishal.
Okay.
Hi. Yeah,
Hi.
just the last slide where you said that the critique.
Miss, are you there? Just a minute.
Yes, sorry? Yes, it's visible now. So the critique questions reductionism while it itself indulges in it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just a clarification there would be great.
Oh, okay. So what I'm saying is that when they are critiquing science, they are reducing science to scientific method. Okay. So in fact, their understanding of science is a narrow understanding of scientific method, and their they also understand science merely in terms of technology, right? So they are themselves reducing science to something. So science is, so that's why, I mean, I wanted to ask this question, that what is science, right? And should it be reduced to scientific method or technology? Is this clear or no? If no, say no. Hello.
Yes, yes. Yeah, I understood the point that you're trying to make. Thank you.
We can take it up then in more detail.
Sure.
Okay, go ahead, Abhijeet.
Yes. So what is science actually? Now, science is of course, it is explanatory descriptions. So these descriptions could be causal or lawful. And if they are lawful, they could be expressed in terms of either empirical regularities or mathematical regularities. I don't think it needs further description to this audience. So science is explanatory theories or ideas. So these are, as I said, these are descriptions of causes or laws to explain and to control experiences. Okay. So basically this is, so this is science, right? I mean, substantively, if someone were to ask us what is science, this is science, right? So now, of course, this science, Now, of course, this science is not given to us, right? Either in our experience or in our biology or wherever. This science has to be developed, and this science is developed in the community of scientists through various practices, right? So, and there is of course, there is, we say that there is a method that governs or that regulates this, that regulates the practices of scientific community, right? So, but before we answer the question, what is scientific method that regulates the practices of scientific community, we have to place science on the canvas of humanity, right? Because scientific achievements are human achievements, but scientific achievements are not the only human achievements or achievements of humanity. Human achievements that are constitutive of valuable human life. So, I mean, when we think of valuable human life, we think of valuable human achievements, and science is only one of those valuable human achievements, right? So science is a part of human knowledge. Now, we value knowledge because we value truth. I mean, the day we will stop valuing truth, I don't think we will value knowledge. And truth is not the only human value, right? Truth is to be found among the good. I mean, when I'm saying good, I'm thinking about righteousness, or moral good, and the beautiful, right? That transcends usefulness. So when we think of science, or if we were to understand scientific method, before we do that, we have to place science on the larger human canvas. Of course, science is an achievement that is valuable, but why we value science? We value science because we value truth, and truth is not the only value. Truth is one of the values. Truth is one of the fundamental value. The other two values are, goodness or righteousness and beauty. Okay. Now these are the fundamental values. Now we have to note that beauty cannot be achieved without good, and good cannot be achieved without truth, right? So you may know this song, Satyam Shivam Sundaram, right? So neither can beauty be reduced to goodness, and goodness cannot be reduced to truth. So all these three values are fundamental in this sense that you cannot achieve one value at the cost of another. You need, if you have to achieve one, you also have to achieve to some extent the other two values. And they cannot be reduced to each other, right? So So value of science is contingent on the value of truth. Science cannot be reduced to a method. The aim of science is truth. Method of science is nothing but the embodiment of the value of science, right? And value of science is intrinsically, necessarily connected with the value of truth. And we should not forget that truth is only one of the three fundamental values, right? Which constitute good human life. So, so having clarified this, let us think about the method of science. Now, why this question of scientific method comes in the discussion? Because, whenever people try to understand scientific temper, they think that scientific temper is somehow, to cultivate scientific temper, you have to master the scientific method, right? Or the method of science. So, this method of science has two dimensions, the ethical and the epistemological. And the method is there to organize scientific practice such that we get knowledge that is reliable, certain, credible, and of course, true. Okay. So this is the aim of scientific method, right? Now, does the practice of science presuppose a practitioner of certain character? To the extent this is so, the purpose of science education is in sync with the purpose of education. Anyway, this is the separate point. So any interpretation of what natural philosophers believed and what they did has to deal with the purposes of natural knowledge and their conceptions of what genuine knowledge of nature is, right? So if you are a scientist, which was called as natural philosopher during those days. So if you are thinking about the scientific method, you cannot think about the scientific method without thinking about what is that scientific method going to produce, right? Because scientific method is only means, and the scientific method is going to produce something. Now, what the scientific method is expected to produce? Well, the scientific method is expected to produce genuine knowledge of nature. Now, you cannot understand the nature of scientific method without understanding the conception of what genuine knowledge of nature is in the eyes of natural philosophers who, to begin with, developed this scientific method. Okay, so therefore Chapin says that any interpretation of what natural philosophers believed and what they did, okay, the practice, has to deal with the purposes of natural knowledge and their conception of what genuine knowledge of nature is. The aim of natural philosophy was the knowledge of physical causes, while mathematics could study the regularities that might be discerned in natural phenomena, whatever their physical causes, right? So, a physicist who extensively use mathematics has this luxury of studying the regularities that could be discerned in natural phenomena, without worrying too much about their physical causes, right? So we know that Newton said that, I don't care about the nature of gravity. I don't engage in any hypothesis about the nature of gravity, right? So now we already talked about, now, of course, I'm sorry. I think, so the aim of scientific method is, of course, knowledge. And this knowledge is a certain knowledge, right? So when we think of certainty, right, reliability or certainty, we are thinking of two things. One is, of course, explanatory certainty, that we want our explanations to be certain. We want that they are true. In fact, our descriptions do, in fact, describe what actually exists in the natural world. So that is explanatory certainty, right? But sometimes we may not achieve explanatory certainty, but we may still achieve predictive certainty, right? So we have certain hypothesis or a certain theory, and based on that theory, we predict something. And that prediction comes to, that prediction turns out to be true, or that prediction turns out to be correct. Sorry, the prediction turns out to be correct. Now, we are not certain about the theory itself, but the prediction comes out to be true, right? So the practice of naturalist philosophy should then be such that it achieves certain knowledge and ensures universal assent to its knowledge claims, right? So now, thinking a little further about this scientific method, those who developed this scientific method in 16th, 17th, and 18th century Britain and Europe, these natural philosophers, they aspired to cure traditional forms of philosophy of its intellectual disorderliness, its notoriously divisive and disputatious form of culture, right? So when this scientific method was developed, it was developed as a response to cure the intellectual, what they saw as intellectual disorderliness, divisiveness, disputations in the culture of philosophy that was rampant at that time. That's how they thought about it. Okay. So they thought that social order depends on shared belief, right? If you don't share beliefs, it is unlikely that you will be able to maintain social order. So social order, they thought, depends upon shared belief, and whether you share beliefs or not, that in turn depends upon the criteria of right thinking that you have in your mind, right? So since social order is seen to depend on shared belief, what criteria of right thinking can be displayed and implemented to ensure such consensus, right? So if you want to maintain social order, you have to have consensus. So to have this consensus, what criteria of right thinking has to be ensured and communicated, right? So we have to come up with certain criteria with which we can decide whether the thinking the grounds for our belief, the thinking, is it right or wrong, right? And if you share those criterias, you will share the beliefs, and if you share the beliefs, okay, your society will be ordered, right? So therefore they thought that the community of natural philosophers should be able to come up with this criteria of right thinking that can be displayed and implemented, right? So method, broadly construed, is the preferred remedy for problems of intellectual disorder. Okay. So to secure right conduct, you have to secure right belief. To secure right belief, they thought that you have to secure right method. Now, why this is method? Because this method, all the members of the scientific community, or all natural philosophers, or all philosophers, okay, let me put it this way, all philosophers who are interested in studying natural causes or studying nature, all those philosophers should come up with right beliefs about nature. And how to secure right beliefs about right means correct, true beliefs about nature. You have to have a right method. So right method will give you right beliefs, and right beliefs will give you right conduct, and you will be part of happy and flourishing society as such, right? So what is proper knowledge? What guarantees its truth? What degree of certainty can we have? And is it proper to expect of knowledge? Who can have knowledge, and on what conditions? Can people be made to believe the same thing? And if so, by what purposefully designed means? Okay. So in response to these questions, okay, what we know as scientific method was developed, right? So Francis Bacon took the contentious state of knowledge, its distempers, that's what he called, as a visible science that they were not genuine knowledge and not fit to contribute to the welfare of the state. For a credible and constructive knowledge, reliable and shared, we have to study things rather than words, else the quality of knowledge must fall under popular contempt, the people being apt to condemn truth upon occasions of controversies and altercations, and to think that they are all out of their way, which never meet. Okay, so this is what he thought. In Bacon's plan, the implementation of proffered method called not for disciplined individual reasoning, as it did for Descartes, but for organized collective labor, bureaucratically organized and intellectually differentiated. Of course, he knew that intellectual slavery will not produce reliable and shared knowledge, but neither does intellectual individualism, which is uncontrolled and undisciplined freedom of belief. So actually, scientific method is a way to achieve this fine balance between uncontrolled and undisciplined freedom of belief on one hand, and excessively controlled, organized collective labor, right? So Bacon famously said, human knowledge and human power meet in one. The ability of natural philosophical knowledge to yield practical outcomes and to produce the means of technological control of nature were taken as reliable tests of its truth. Okay, so so the scientific societies emerged as the seats of knowledge, okay, unlike hierarchical and disputatious universities, which were there that time in Europe and UK. They aim to provide a novel organizational form uniquely suited to the new practice. Most of the new societies mobilize themselves around some more or less formal conception of method, and all of them placed high value on the necessity of disciplined collective labor in the making of proper natural knowledge. Okay. So these new societies manifested a pronounced concern for orderliness and the rules of proper behavior in making and evaluating natural knowledge. Okay. So when you make natural knowledge, of course, your job is to communicate it to the larger scientific community, and that larger scientific community is expected to evaluate that natural knowledge. So they thought that contentious matters of politics, theology, and metaphysics threaten the good order and continuance of conversation. So conversation becomes impossible due to these contentious matters. And the Royal Society of London explicitly prohibited its fellows from speaking of religion or politics during the course of its scientific meetings. So the critics' view of scientific method, okay, Nandi, Vishwanathan, Shiv Vishwanathan, and all those, the critics' view of science, scientific method, and scientific temper does not care. It fails to recognize this understanding of scientific method. So actually, it is glib, okay, and indifferent to the differentiation and harmony of values and principles that makes not only both science and humanities possible. Okay, so this is my argument. In effect, Nandi advocates the replacement of scientific temper with humanistic temper, as if humanistic temper is possible without scientific temper. Now, I don't think that humanistic temper is possible without scientific temper, because humanistic temper will necessarily involve aesthetic values, which are not possible without ethical values, and ethical values are not possible without epistemic values, as I already discussed, right? So actually what Nandi advocates as counter statement is not at all a counter statement, right? So I mean, there is no necessity of saying humanistic temper as opposed to scientific temper, right? So confusing ethical values with epistemic values takes us in no man's land, okay, where opacity is the name of the game. Okay, so now, of course, the critics don't agree with it. So, for example, Sarukkai in 2017 writes, the terrible cases of lynching, hatred, oppression, and misuse of religion must be unequivocally opposed. For those who are serious about that task, the solution is more important than the scientific method used to achieve it. Now, of course, I mean, he was writing about the limits of, or rather he was writing that, you know, all this talk about scientific temper is rather unnecessary, okay, if not useless. So so he says that, you know, the more important problems in front of society are these terrible cases of lynching, hatred, oppression, and misuse of religion, right? And it must be unequivocally opposed, and scientific method is useless to do this. Yes, this is the problem, right? And this he's talking about something serious that oh, sorry. So yes, so he is talking about, he says that the solution is more important than the scientific method used to achieve it. That's right, that we need a solution to these terrible cases, right, of lynching. But what is the problem, right? Yes, we need solution, and solution is very important, but what is the problem now? And is scientific temper a cause of the problem, or the lack of scientific temper is the cause of the problem? So it's not clear, right? So in fact, lynching is a symptom of ethical failure, right? It's a failure of education and ethics and morality. Education that is equally necessary for scientific as well as ethical well-being of humans, right? So Sarukkai's solution for posterity is, he writes, to find a new science that can accommodate new ways of understanding the human as a scientific problem, right? But again, this speaks of a confusion, for this can never be a scientific problem. It is not a scientific problem, right? Now, to be fair with Sarukkai, the just proposed solution is for posterity, he says. For the present time, we can use only very powerful tools to deal with these problems. Okay? Methods of ethical and humanitarian approaches. So again, like Ashish Nandi, what Ashish Nandi did in 1982, Sarukkai seems to propose the same thing in 2017. He says that, look, we don't need a scientific method, but we need methods of ethical and humanitarian approaches. Now, there is a deep problem there, right? Because lynching is precisely a failure to appreciate that ethics is not merely a tool. It is not a manner of tool, but a matter of principles, of intrinsic values versus use values. Lynching, sorry, there is a spelling mistake. Lynching is not due to failed dealings. It is due to failed education, right? So I'm not sure what Sarukkai is talking about here. And ethics is the central, but the only constituent of education. Epistemology and aesthetics are equally necessary, and no epistemic education is possible without scientific education, and therefore scientific temper is again comes back into the picture, right? So now, so good human life requires education. Education requires science education. Science education requires that women and men learn to embody values and principles of science, that is scientific temper. So in fact, for Nehru, scientific temper is a part of the values and principles that people of India should stand for. In fact, he conceptualized scientific temper as a part of the national philosophy of India, right? But this is not the case for Sarukkai, Nandi, Vishwanathan and company, right? Why not? For Sarukkai argues that it is within cultures of scientific rationality that some of the worst crimes on humanity have occurred. Not only have these crimes led to millions of deaths, but they have also led to, they had a terrible effect on marginalized community across the world in the name of scientific development, right? Now, this view is common across the writings of Nandi, Vishwanathan, Claudia Alvarez, and Vandana Shiva, right? So, but
sorry to interrupt, Abhijeet. How long will you take?
Yeah, I think I'll take 5 more minutes. Okay.
Okay,
But to the extent that such hyperboles can be tempered with truth, who is to blame for this? Who else but the state, according to them, according to the critics, who else but the state-sponsored science and scientifics, claim the critics. So Vishwanathan writes, our scientists are how to pronounce this? Gerontocratic, with career lines that would make a cat envious. Think of the powers of the Menons, Swaminathans, Yashpals, clinging to science policy like barnacles. Violence is possible within the framework of law, but between constitutionality, technocracy, and populist acclamation of it, democracies can create tyranny in the name of democracy. All it needs is a bit of science as expert consultants, or more modestly, midwives, right? So he blames that he thinks that science is violent, right? Now, the problem with this critique is that it is suicidal, right? Self-suicidal, rather. Yes, tyranny is possible within a functional democracy, but why put a why but why find a scapegoat on the altar of postmodernism and name it science or scientific temper, right? Is it because postmodernist dogma primes its followers against rigorous, systematic, epistemically sound study of what makes tyranny possible? The critique turns a blind eye to the death of truth and hopes for democracy, right? But science and democracy both presuppose ethical uprightness and epistemological soundness, which these people don't care about. But this answer won't be acceptable to the critiques, for they do not care to distinguish between what is true from what is good and what is good from what is beautiful, and therefore they have no way to differentiate the value of ends from the value of means, right? And this is a very important distinction. We don't have time to talk about it today, but and therefore they dismiss the human faculty to differentiate between scientific knowledge from science-based technologies, and two, the instrumental value of science and technology as a means from the categorical moral value of the ends that these means are used to achieve. In fact, this is the very cause of the ethical failure of critics' positions. So there are some more slides, but I'll stop here. Mashood, yeah.
Thank you, Abhijeet.
We can talk about this during the question answer sessions. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Should I stop sharing?
Yeah, you can, but some may, like some of the questions may require, okay, you can keep, like if necessary, you can bring it back. Thank you, Abhijeet,
just to conclude. So what the problem with this critique is that there are certain necessary distinctions that one has to make if education or democracy, including science education, is to be possible. Okay, and they fail to care for these distinctions. Now the problem is like the distinction between means and value of means and value of ends, right? The distinction between that I didn't talk about, the distinction between is and ought, right? And various other things that I talked about. Now this is the problem with this critique that I see. Yes, Mashood.
No, thank you, Abhijeet, for a thought-provoking talk and illustrating like how philosophical argumentation is made. So that was also interesting. Now we can open it up for questions. There are a couple of them in the chat box. Others can raise their hands or type in.
I can't see the chat box. Oh, maybe.
Okay, the first one is from Sanavne ji. You want to speak?
Yeah, see, I have only commented, but I'm sorry, this is very highly philosophical and I cannot use that very glorified and ornamental style of putting words and explaining science and scientific temper. But I am very sad that nowhere else the issue of science and scientific temper is taken as from the angle of humanity, and there is no word even single time that what is a reform or reformist as a being human in that talk. Thank you. This was just my comment.
No, Sonane, I don't agree with this because I did talk about it. Yeah, but we can talk about it later. Yeah, I mean, maybe whenever.
Okay.
Yeah.
So another thing which came to my mind while we are talking about, all throughout scientific knowledge, like associated with where this values of skepticism and provisionality. And I hope all the scientists knew that these are the central values of science, and the move to put a facade, I would say, use a mask of certainty over it, more than from the perspective of knowledge construction in science, I think came from certain political necessities. So isn't it necessary to distinguish these two? Actually scientists knew that scientific knowledge is provisional and skeptical, but on the same hand, for certain political social reasons, they may have to put the
complete.
Is that the case, or were you?
No, so I couldn't talk about this. Look, we shouldn't confuse between what is the aim of science, right? Of course, the aim of science is to have certain knowledge, right? Now, of course, no scientist thinks that he or she is successful in it, right? So I don't think that certainty is projected by scientists themselves, or imposed or advertised, right? But yes, when a state adopts certain policies, right? So a state may have to assume certain certainty to justify its policies, right? Now, the recent example is the restrictions that the state decided to apply on its citizens because of the predicted virulence of coronavirus, right? So yes, when a certain scientific findings which are tentative, right? So in empirical sciences, we can never achieve 100% certainty. So when certain scientific findings are transformed into policies that affect many of the citizens, right? So this question of, to what extent this certainty has to be advertised, or to what extent this certainty justifies the policy, that questions become very important. And therefore one of the values of science is transparency, right? One cannot say that, scientists or scientific community, it will be unscientific if the scientific community projects certainty more than what is justified in that case. Yeah. Does that answer what you?
Yeah, but is there an inconsistencies in at the same time accepting scientific knowledge and scientific pursuit as like provisional skeptical, then bringing certainty into it? Like, is like, how can skeptical, certainty, professionalism, all three can go like they have a, there's a necessary conflict there, right? Certainty and
no. So I mean, of course, all of us know that scientific knowledge is a construct, right? So I mean, we don't, I mean, neither our experience nor our reason, determines scientific ideas, right? So of course, each has its contribution. Both reason and experience contribute to development of scientific ideas or scientific theories, but it is after all a construct, right? Now, how do you distinguish a scientific construct or a scientific model or a scientific theory from a non-scientific model or non-scientific theory, right? So you argue that the scientific theory is closer to reality, or the description is closer to closer to reality or true, right? To the extent we can understand. Now, so therefore, certainty becomes an aim of science and the legitimate aim of science. But we also acknowledge that we don't achieve it.
An ideal that is strived for, kind of.
Sorry?
An ideal that is strived for.
Yes, that we strive for it. And that striving is what motivates us, right?
Okay.
We value that. But at the same time, we never claim that we have achieved it. I mean, we mean scientists should never claim that they have achieved it. So they should be transparent about it. But nonetheless, still it remains a value to be, looked up towards, strived for. So therefore, yes, I mean, that remains important, right? Important motivating factor in the development.
Got it.
But one should be transparent. One should be transparent about it, particularly when those ideas which are tentative are transformed into large-scale policies of state, right?
When it impacts lives, yes.
At that time, the transparency is very important, right? And the transparency is will be missing if we cultivate ignorance instead of cultivating scientific temper, isn't it? So it's very important that we won't understand the strengths and limits of science unless we have a scientific outlook, and we won't have a scientific outlook unless we know the value, both value and limits of what we are advocating. Yeah.
Okay. Suravi, like there are a couple of comments from you. Were they clarified, or you want to ask any question? Clarified. Okay. What about Bishal? You replied to some of them.
Yeah.
Anything further on those?
Yeah, I do have a lot of questions, but yeah, it would really have been helpful if we are having a physical discussion, like to go back and forth in a way, sort of. But yeah, largely, yeah, there are certain inconsistencies the way you have, sort of structured the talk. You do critique the idea coming from the humanities, quote unquote. However, there are a lot of rhetorical.
Not from humanities, I'm sorry, yeah. But you continue.
Okay, whatever, like non-science, non-science backgrounds, people who don't appreciate science, for example. But the the explanations that you are proposing or the ideas that you're giving, they are also highly rhetorical. I mean, they're pretty vague, like what is good, what is beauty, what is truth. Haven't these ideas themselves been, deconstructed by philosophers of science themselves? Feminist philosophers of science have deconstructed objectivity, truth, all of these concepts, and inevitably, all of these vague ideas, they hide a sort of inherent bias which is already present in science. So the kind of, I mean, I get it that you are trying to argue against, so it was critique of scientific temper that you have presented here. But yeah, that critique, I don't think it is, you are actually engaging with the critique properly. You are sort of cherry picking certain arguments out of them. And like, I'm not really convinced by certain things, because you are using a lot of things which are criticize about the humanities themselves, like vague terms like truth, beauty, all of those things. And also the sort of outlook of the talk is that science is a sort of panacea, when we know that science is a sort of panacea, cure to all things, or scientific temper is the cure to all things, or for example, your replacement of humanistic values or humanistic temper with scientific temper, or scientific temper encompassing humanistic temper, or humanistic temper not possible without scientific temper. That is the essentializing sort of tendency that you have sort of put forth. So yeah, I mean, I would really love to have these discussions physical, but I don't know in what capacity we can have it online.
No, I mean, don't blame it on the virtual mode of our interactions, because what I mean, it's very interesting. Your comment is very interesting, because you are actually defending a rhetoric, okay, by all these people, by terming that what I said is rhetorical, right? So that's a very interesting point that I note, because
just for clarifying, I'm not defending. I am open to all sorts of ideas.
Okay, but you termed what I say as rhetorical.
Yes, I'm sort of using my critical outlook to judge your presentation also.
No, of course you should do that, and that's why we are here. So I appreciate you putting it on the table. So the point is that yes, I agree that truth, goodness, and beauty, okay, are not very simple ideas to understand, and philosophers have spent, at least they have been thinking about 3, 4, 5,000 years about all these things, right? So they are not very easy to understand, right? But the point is that before, so I agree with that, right? But just because they are not very easy to understand, okay, that does not mean that you get a license to dismiss them as rhetorical, right? In fact, their dismissal is rhetorical, is what is the argument. That is the first point. The second point is that I'm forget about whether you understand truth, beauty, or goodness, right? Moral goodness. Forget whether you understand it or not. But the point is that you cannot conceptualize, if you are so concerned about democracy or justice, you cannot conceptualize human life, education, and human achievements, including scientific achievements, in a completely gray shade, right? That's the problem. Now, what happens if you do that? Of course, of course, of course, it is the case that in everyday human life, the distinctions that I talked about between truth, beauty, and goodness are not very clear-cut distinctions. Yes, that is agreed, right? But that does not mean that those values are not necessary constituents of good human life, right? And if you don't differentiate it, look, to understand gray or to educate someone in gray, we have to make them learn about black and white, right? Now, if you have no understanding of black and white, you have no understanding of gray either, right? So the problem with this critique is that they don't take into account different fundamental aspects of human achievements, and they don't place science in those, on that canvas, right? Why? Because they just don't care about these differences, right? Isn't it? Now, if you don't care about these differences, what you want to achieve, namely, justice, democracy, etc., that you can't achieve. In fact, you are doing more harm to all these things than good, right? By simply being, so instead of, to use Toni Morrison's phrase, you are cultivating ignorance instead of educating the public, right? So, that's dangerous in my view. Yeah.
Anyway,
I would really like to know the context of Toni Morrison phrase, because as far as I have read, Toni Morrison should be on the other side, not on your side.
No, not at all. Not at all. Yeah. Either Toni Morrison is wrong or you have not understood Toni Morrison. Yeah. Yes.
Okay, Chaitanya, go ahead.
Yeah. Hi. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Hi.
I can't see you.
Oh, okay. Hang on. Hi. Yeah. So actually,
otherwise, it seems that I'm talking to myself. Yeah. Yes.
Right. See, I was thinking about this point you made about what natural philosophers believed about scientific knowledge. So maybe maybe I've misunderstood. Sorry. What natural philosophers believed about scientific knowledge? So your argument was kind of it went like we have to understand science, and to understand science we have to understand what do natural philosophers believe about scientific knowledge, right? What do scientists believe about scientific knowledge, right?
Yeah. No, so much of discussion turns on scientific method. We have to understand the development of scientific method. Yeah. That's true. That's true. Yeah.
So, so maybe I have misunderstood, but it seems like, see, there's a difference between what people believe scientific method is going to be and what it actually turns out to be. For example, like Bacon proposed a scientific method which is this very linear kind of idealized format. But recent studies, for example, Latour has shown how it is actually much more messy and cyclical and all of that. Yeah. I'm just wondering if how that so like shouldn't see there's a difference between what kind of values philosophers like scientists may espouse and what they might actually believe in. Like the example, even in teacher education, my work is in teacher education. Yes. So we frequently come across this problem where teachers say they believe in one thing, but then they may actually believe in something else. So I'm wondering if that is happening, that may be happening here as well.
Therefore, you can't ask them, what do you believe in? Yes.
No, I mean, then you have to look at their actions and what they are doing, and you kind of have to infer.
You have to infer their beliefs from various. Yeah, that's true. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
No.
So my question that.
Yeah. Sorry, go on.
No, go ahead. Yeah. I mean, my question also is kind of like, I mean, I don't know if. Okay, thanks.
No, so so let me. Okay, forget about slides. No, actually, there are various points that I had in mind to talk about, but time was too little. But that's fine. So basically, yes, I get what you're saying. You are saying that, look, if you do study of community of scientists, and if you try to find out the values that they actually espouse, right, there will be a difference between, the ideals that I have sketched, or whatever Bacon or Boyle or Newton or those people had in mind, right? And today, you look the difference, right? Isn't it? So that's that. Even if one were to, even if suppose Chaitanya undertakes this project, and I think to study the values that the present day scientific community actually adheres to, right, puts them in practice, you will find a large gap between the ideal and the actual, right? Yes. Now, now the first answer to this is that, okay, the first answer, which is because I'm talking to a community of science educators. The first answer is, look, you are not interested in what the present day scientists commit to or value. What you are interested is in educating the future generation of, scientifically minded citizens. Okay. So as science educators, what matters to you? When you are educating children, will you tell them that, look, the present day scientists are, do not practice what they claim that they are committed to? Will you tell them this, this present day social condition of science and scientists? Or will you tell them that, look, those, when the science was being developed, right? Okay, the modern day Western science has been, right? And even if we go back, right, even if you study, even ancient Indian philosophy or Aristotle or Plato, right, there are certain values that are proposed, right? Why they are proposed? Because they thought that, if human beings have to achieve something worthwhile, like knowledge or even moksha or salvation, right, they have to follow a certain path. They have to adhere to certain values. So, I mean, it will do good to, it will do good to human life. So will you focus, when you are teaching students of science, will you focus on those values, or will you tell them the present day social condition? No harm in telling them the present day social condition, but do you want them to reproduce the present day social condition? Even if for the sake of argument, I agree with you that, okay, all this is, this is not a rhetoric, by the way, but but all this is, too ideal to be practical or something like that. Or that's true. It is ideal but it is the education, it is the success of science educators that will make them make it real, right? Not today, but that will make it real 10 years, 20 years down the line, isn't it? Now, if you don't do this work as science education is today, okay, then after 20 years also, if Chaitanya studies the same thing, he will find the same thing, right? Isn't it? Now, who will be responsible for the results of these studies, which Chaitanya will do 20 years from today? Who will be responsible? Present day science educationists, right? Isn't it? So the point that was there in the later slides, that the reality that we educators, not me, but you educators have to construct for tomorrow, that depends upon what values do you cultivate today, right?
Okay. So I mean, they may not be necessarily.
From the point of view of educators, this is not a problem. Yes. And look, I mean, so David Hume gave us this famous distinction between is and ought, which is very important distinction, right? And that is also confused by these critics. They don't care about is and ought distinction, but it is a very important distinction, right? Something is the case, particularly in the domain of values. Something is the case does not mean something ought to be the case. Right?
Okay.
So what ought to be taught to a generation of science students? How do you decide that? That's the question. Okay.
Okay. I will think about this. Yeah. Thanks.
Can I say something?
Who is there? Who is it?
Vimal Raj.
Vimal Raj, go ahead. Just a second. Abhijeet, you are okay, right? It's 5 o'clock.
Yeah, I'm okay.
Okay.
I'm the one who is responsible for this.
So just if people have other commitments.
I couldn't. Yeah.
No, since it is 5 o'clock, if people have other commitments, they are free to leave, but Abhijeet will be around. We can, anybody interested, we can continue the discussion.
Yes.
Yeah, Vimal, go ahead.
Yes. Yeah, sure. Thanks. So I want to comment on the as a science educator, so what we are trying to educate students, so are we want to analyze what the scientists are doing now, and so that the scientists having the actions they are producing as certain values, and what they there are two values, that differentiate, and that they may not agree with each. So are we as a science educators so do we need to focus that, or are we going to focus on what students are going to learn about science, and so we are going to teach how the science has been evolved and like that. So my comment is on that is that so definitely as a science educator, I would definitely look for what scientists do right now, and what their values are, because if I'm educating students, then the students who are studying science, they're going to be practitioners of sciences in the present day, and also in the future, and they need to know what the science is standing for and what the scientists are doing. They need to know the values. They need to know how it plays out in social, political, in every arena. So definitely, I would analyze what science and scientists do. Yeah. Thanks.
Yes, very right. That's true. I am not questioning the value of. I'm not questioning that those studies are useless, right? I'm not saying that. Okay, but if you were to find a difference between what is advocated or espoused by those who developed scientific method, okay, and those who practice it today. If you were to find the difference, what will you do with this difference, right? Of course, why this difference is, you are absolutely right. Why this difference is necessary? Because if I'm a teacher, okay, and this is the ABC of constructivism. If I am a teacher, I should know the ideas of the students that I am teaching, and I should know the what can be called a social reality, of which my students are part of, right? And I am also a part of. So of course, it is very important to study. I mean, these studies are important in this sense, right? That we get to know where we stand, and from here where we go, right? So of course, these studies tell us where we stand, but from, okay, we stand here, right? We stand in a society where scientists believe these things or value these things. We stand in a society where my students have these beliefs and these values, okay? We stand in a society where I have these beliefs and these values, okay? And this is important because I'm teaching the students and I should know their beliefs, their present beliefs and values. So these, I'm not questioning that these studies are useless. What I'm saying is that, I mean, to Chaitanya's question, I was saying that, okay, if you were to find the difference between the ideals and what is present today, what will you do it, right? From where do you, how do you decide where do you go from here? Having understood or known where we stand, right? How do you decide where do you go from here? That was my point. So I agree with you that these studies are important. Yes. Yeah.
Okay. If Vimal, yes. Okay. Yes, if there are no further questions, we can thank Abhijeet for his time and the thought-provoking session. I'm sure, like, if you have further questions, you can write to him, in his email, and he will reply. Hope that's fine, Abhijeet.
Yes, of course. I mean, if there are questions, I'm ready to take them.
Sure. Like, I don't find any questions as of now, but
Okay.
if there are like further discussions later, or they may want some like readings or further details of what you were talking about, I hope people can. Karen was asking something. Oh, Karen, you like, I don't know. There, I got a personal message that Karen was asking something. Karen, do you want to ask something? No. Okay, she doesn't have it.
Okay.
Okay, then let's thank Abhijeet. Thank you once again, Abhijeet, for a wonderful talk and engaging with the questions. And of course, a very, it can't be settled in one and a half hour. Like, we all appreciate that. But thank you for your time and patiently taking up all the questions and answering.
Thank you, Mashood. Yeah. Thank you. Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.